Precipitation test of net ionic equation and calculation. Student, so far we have already learned two analyze technique to calculate. One, we do the titration. The rule we're using acid and base neutralizing to find the unknown sample concentration. We're using the acid and base neutralization rule. When they fully neutralize, mole must equal to mole, and so that we can find the unknown sample of the concentration. And that's what we do so far. And we also learn through the monitoring about the precipitation rule. And now we're going to use this precipitation net ionic equation to do calculation. Early, we learned about how to test the positive ion and how to test the negative ion to identify. And so that how we're going to drop it into net ionic equation. And here's the example. And we learn it at E11. So, like AgCl form AgCl solid. Pb2i form PbI2. Barium sulfate form barium sulfate. And that's the way we write down net ionic equation. And now we're going to use net ionic equation to do calculation. Read this question. A student wants to analyze the sulfate on this lawn fertilizer. He weighed out 10 grams of fertilizer dissolved in water, and he put BaCl to precipitate. So, a white precipitate barium sulfate form, it weighs 1.8 grams. Calculate the percentage by the mass of the sulfate in fertilizer. Look at the picture of this precipitation experiment. The fertilizer is the X sulfate. It precipitates with barium chloride, and it will form precipitation. You dry it up, that's what you get. So, he weighed the fertilizer is 1.0 gram, and the precipitation is 1.8 gram. We're going to use this data to do calculation. First, this X sulfate mixed with barium chloride, you precipitate barium sulfate. It showed me that this fertilizer is 1 gram. Barium sulfate is 1.8 gram. There is a relationship. If you can precipitate it all, this sulfate, barium sulfate, must equal to the fertilizer sulfate, because you can't find any other sulfate. So these two numbers should be the same. If I find one, I can find the other, the fertilizer sulfate. But how? This equation. If the molar mass of sulfate, here, the molar mass from the periodic table, you add up the sulfate. divide by the molar mass from periodic table of barium sulfate. Now you get the proportion of sulfate over the barium sulfate. That's the rule. Then you times it by 1.8 of barium sulfate. It gives you the 0.74 gram. This 0.74 gram represents the proportion of the sulfate. So, the whole barium sulfate is 1.8 and the sulfate content is 0.74. Remember, this 0.7, this sulfate must means the fertilizer sulfate. So that's how you find the sulfate, by using this equation. Next step, percentage by mass means in gram. 0.74 gram over 1 gram of sample times 100. That's the answer. Student, please practice this question well.